From the Matrix Home Solutions studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560, The Answer, online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, and your Alexa-powered smart speaker, on TuneIn, iHeart, and radio.com. If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. And last week when the House was debating the Equality Act, so-called Equality Act, which is just the Orwellian term for inculcating trans-identitarian ideology into federal law, federal discrimination law, there was an interesting exchange between Representative Gregory Stubbe from Florida and Mr. Sardonicus, that would be Jerry Nadler. Listen to how that went. Representative Stubbe arguing against the Equality Act, and Nadler's quick rejoinder.
And this bill speaks directly against what is laid out in Scripture. Our government, through this bill, is going to redefine what a woman is and what a man is. It can be anyone who identifies in that gender.
Mr. Stubbe, what any religious tradition ascribes as God's will is no concern of this Congress.
There's no question that God's will has nothing to do with this Congress. I concede the point, Representative Nadler. It also has nothing to do with the education of children, like pre-adolescent children, at some of the most elite schools in America, like the schools that Megyn Kelly sends her kids to. Megyn Kelly was on with Bill Maher explaining why she pulled her pre-adolescent son out of his $56,000 a year school in Manhattan.
Now, he's 6. Like, can he learn how to spell Cleveland before we, activate him? He lives in New York City. We got buses, we got subways, we got crime. He's got things to worry about other than social activism. And if he's going to be activated, Doug and I should do it. Not a kindergarten teacher. Didn't run it by us.
This is what.
Mm-hmm. She said they loved the kids' school even though they knew there were political differences. But when she found out that her son in 3rd grade, another son, was involved in a 3-week experimental trans education program, she's like, no,
I'll take my money and leave.
Not without our advice and counsel. So I guess the question is being a protector of women's sports, is that enough? That's where Trump focused in response to the Equality Act and everything that's going on with trans-identitarian politics in his speech at CPAC last night.
We must protect the integrity of women's sports. So important.
Yeah.
Well, you think feminists would be upset by the Equality Act. I mean, this is going to hurt young women who want to play sports because you're going to have to compete against men or boys.
Some are, but, frankly, to some extent, like President Trump, they missed the point, I think. A decade more. You think marriage redefinition has no consequences. You don't understand that it's down the road to the redefinition of sex. You don't understand the implications for that. Oh, it's bathrooms. What's the big deal? Oh, sports. Now it's a big deal. So the utilitarian argument we're going to make is about preserving women's sports. But is the utilitarian argument enough to preserve women's sports and also reality, biological reality? And the answer, in my view, is no, it isn't. You have to address the premise of the policies that are being advanced by the identitarians. And there are just very few conservatives who either understand it or both understand it and are willing to address it. Perhaps Rand Paul, per his exchange with Dr. Rachel Levine last week, is one of the few to address it fundamentally and comprehensively and thoughtfully, bring people along since they're so bad at connecting dots, including many self-styled conservatives. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined again by Ryan T. Anderson. He is the president of the Ethics and Public Policy Center. He's also the author of When Harry Became Sally, Responding to the Transgender Moment. You used to be able to order that at Amazon, not anymore. Ryan T. Anderson, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Happy to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Before we get to your recent experience with Amazon, just another story to my point. Because the last time we had you on, this was a while back now, I asked if you thought, and I think it was on the occasion of the publication of your book, do you think we're winning this? Do you think we're going to win this? And you were very optimistic, and I was very pessimistic, and I think I was right. So I want you to tell me why I was wrong. This story from the BBC, just to add more evidence to my case. Government agrees to call pregnant women mothers. When that is a decision that is at bar, that is in controversy, to me, that's the definition of we're losing.
Sure, but the question is, are we going to win? And the answer to that question is yes, because we're on the side of reality. We're on the side of truth. And you can only deny reality and deny truth for so long. There are consequences of denying just, basic, obvious facts of human nature. You can only rail against human nature for so long. And so the important question, to my mind, is how long will it take before truth prevails, and how many human beings will be harmed in the process? Trump talked about female athletics. Other people want to talk about kind of the down the road consequences. I want to focus on what about the consequences to children right now who are being told a lie about their bodies and their identities. Right? Children who are being placed on puberty blocking drugs, cross-sex hormones, children who are having surgeries performed on their bodies as teenagers. This is going against the truth of the human person. It's going against human nature. It's not going to have good outcomes, which is why I'm confident that, look, in the long run, we're going to prevail. The difficult question is, how long will it take?
Well, Dr. Levine, she wouldn't answer the question when Rand Paul kept saying, will minors be allowed to permanently change their genders? Minors. That's genital mutilation.
There's a reason why Dr. Levine won't answer that question, and it's because the answer that Dr. Levine would give would be highly controversial and unpopular, right? And so this is what you see. The activists, they don't want to say what they really think out loud and in the public because they know the general public is not on board with sterilizing children, with removing a teenager's reproductive organs, et cetera, et cetera. But this is the policy that the Biden administration is going to be imposing on all of us, which is why it was very courageous of Senator Paul to, repeatedly ask those questions, even when the answers was more or less stonewalling.
Right. It's insidious, as you're describing, but that works. And so they will continue to lie to people's faces. They have no problem with this. And as you know, the curriculum here is embedded with Black Lives Matter. So now the forces have been joined with among the cultural Marxists to play the race game as well as to play the sex identity game, and that's going to be very hard to unpack because even if people disagree on something like minors being given puberty blockers and surgery without parental consent and so forth, this is all you're at the same time you have the cultural Marxists in charge of all of the civic institutions and cultural institutions, inculcating kids with this ideology. And so, the one-off exchange between Rand Paul and Dr. Rachel Levine doesn't win the day. The who's in control of the schools and those young minds wins the day.
Well, and look, that's why it's important that it not be a one-off exchange, right? This is why it's important that you're covering this on your show, that, I'm trying to do my part with books that I've written, with lectures that I give, with other media appearances. I mean, you're right. The left controls the most important organ of culture, right? They control the schools, they control the universities, they control Hollywood. And what that means is that people like you and me and our listeners need to exercise influence in the areas where we can, right? And we have to recognize that, it's not a level playing field, that the left has kind of certain commanding heights that they control, but that isn't an excuse for us to just say, oh, well, we're going to lose, so let's give up. Right? And
no.
That's a charge for us to fight back all the harder.
No, I agree, but I think there's some scales that need to fall from some eyes with respect to what the state of play is and what you can expect if you pursue certain avenues. For example, another story, this out of the State University of New York, where a young man who's in the education program there, going on to be a teacher, was suspended for posting on social media that a man is a man and a woman is a woman. suspended from the programs. So, I mean, I don't think, even though we talk about this and your audience and our audience here, I think there's a real, almost willful blindness, even among some conservatives, to understand exactly how challenging the landscape has become to be a sentinel for the truth.
I think for some people that might be true. I guess in my case, it's such a foreign experience for me because I see the challenge so clearly, and I have to live with it every day. But I imagine that what you're saying is true. For some people, would rather stick their head in the ground and ignore what's going on around them. And I just think it's going to be our jobs to make sure that they can't ignore it.
So, Ryan, have you reached out to Amazon and asked them why they're erasing your book?
Yeah, so my publisher did, and it took them 2 days before they finally got back to us, and all they will say is that it now violates their content policy. A book that didn't violate their content policy for 3 years now does violate their content policy. They won't tell us which aspect of the content policy the book violates. They won't tell us which page of the book, committed the offense. So this is more or less just, the largest e-commerce retailer in the world flexing its muscles, right? This isn't there's no transparency here. There's no actual communication. It's just that they're the biggest business in the world on these issues, selling these materials, selling books and other goods over the internet, and they can do what they want to do. That's more or less the message we're receiving.
Well, I mean, I guess you're probably not surprised by it, particularly after the treatment that Abigail Shrier got for her book on the same topic, from a bit of a different angle, but same topic. So, you got in under the wire, and now they got to claw back and purge you along with her.
I mean, my thought here is that the timing is awfully suspicious. That when President Trump was in office, when the Republicans controlled the Senate, when Bill Barr was the Attorney General, they were reluctant to do something like this. And now with a change of power, both at the White House and at the Attorney General's office and in the Senate, and last week was the House vote of the Equality Act, right? So the timing of this just makes everything a little suspicious, and we'll have to see how it plays out.
Elucidate for our listeners the implications of the Equality Act from your perspective. This is more than just about sort of ideology or discrimination law. It has real-world implications for churches and schools and private institutions.
Yeah, so look, the Equality Act, it's billed as, we're going to protect people from unjust discrimination, but that's not actually what it does. It's not a shield protecting vulnerable minorities from unjust discrimination. It's a sword persecuting people who believe the truth about human nature. Right? So if you believe that we are created male and female, and that male and female are created for each other, under the Equality Act, you will now be a civil rights offender. Right? You will be violating civil rights law if you try to live that out at your business, at your school, at your charity, at your hospital, at your doctor's office. This will have huge implications for how we practice medicine. This will have implications for how we teach children. This will have implications for bathrooms and locker rooms and sports teams. And more or less anyone who's trying to do any of those things based on reality will now be running afoul of federal civil rights law.
And do you see this potentially metastasizing into speech and thought crimes? Like, for example, the kid at the State University of New York, if you put this in writing, that's hate speech. If you say this out loud or think this, even in private, that's hate thinking and hate speaking is another form of it. And what we've seen from the left recently is a willingness to reconsider the First Amendment and protections for things like so-called hate speech as they define it.
I think we're going to see all these issues litigated in court should the Equality Act become law. I mean, and one thing to point out is that it still has a pretty big hurdle to clear in the Senate because, at least for right now, we still have the legislative filibuster. And so this would require 60 votes in the Senate to become law. If the Democrats get rid of the legislative filibuster, and if they can keep all 50 of their senators voting in favor of it, then I think Vice President Harris probably cast the deciding vote in its favor. If that were to happen, then I do think you are going to see litigation on all these areas. They will say that if you refuse to use, the appropriate pronouns, if you refuse to speak falsely, that you're now creating a hostile work environment or you're engaged in hate speech, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think all this is really going to do is just create a lot of work for lawyers.
Ryan T. Anderson, president of the Ethics and Public Policy Center, author of When Harry Became Sally, Responding to the Transgender Moment. And where can people get your book now that they can't get it on Amazon?
Well, you can buy it direct from the publisher, which is probably going to be the quickest way for listeners to get the book. It's encounterbooks.com. Barnes & Noble is still selling it, but they're sold out, right? And so Amazon sells so many books that when they cancel a book, they just send all their customers to Barnes & Noble. They created so much PR buzz about this. But I would say that the real impact here is not my personal book sales. It's the chilling effect this will have on the market. What future author or publisher is going to be willing to write and publish a book that tells the truth on these issues if they're afraid that Amazon will refuse to sell it